Hey, Katie.
Hello.
Hello. You know, that threw me off. In a recent episode, I remember we were talking about baseball. I had to.
Uh,
Because in that episode, I didn't have a dad joke, so I had to make this one especially bad. We're going to explore that in just a second. You are listening to The New Year Digressions.
that was a pretty good one. I hate
I'm
to say
so
it, but that
proud
was
of
a
that.
pretty good one.
I'm so proud of that one.
Okay, onward
Oh
and upward.
man, where have I to where have I fallen? If I'm so proud of that,
Indeed, indeed.
biggest accomplishment all day. Okay, so this example, let's recount the example because why not?
Yeah. Okay. So the idea was, imagine that you are some kind of baseball scout and you're trying to figure out what the batting average of a baseball player is. And the batting average, like there's this thing called like a true batting average, which is kind of an abstract quantity, which is how often would this baseball player hit the baseball in an infinite number of times that at bat. And
And that's get on base
or yeah,
specifically.
whatever a batting average. I think it's yeah, I think it's getting on base. I think that's
Do
what a
I
batting
think
average
home
is.
runs count too, right?
Oh, well, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point is you don't have an infinite number of times that the batter has been up to bat. Instead, what you have is some number of times that they've been up to bat. And from that, you can calculate sort of this empirical batting average. But the question is, once you have that number, what does that tell you about their sort of true underlying unseen batting average? Because that's what you're actually interested in. And so we were talking about this. Is there like a way that we can formulate this in like a sort of Bayesian way, and how one of the very reasonable guesses that you can make is, well, my best guess about what their batting average is going to be in the future is let's just take what it's been in the past.
Right. You just say, okay, they've done so well, they're going to just continue doing exactly as well.
Yeah, yeah. So they batted .25 in the past, so let's guess .25 in the future.
And they're still in the major leagues, huh?
I think .25 is,
I
that's pretty good, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, your best guess is .25, and maybe there's like a standard deviation that you can assign to that, which you've probably also taken from data as well. So .25 plus minus .02 or something like this, maybe. So most of the time you expect them to be between .23 and .27. So then the question is, let's suppose that instead of just having this one baseball player, you have an entire baseball team. So you have this person's RBI. No, that's not what an RBI is. This person's batting average. RBI is a different thing. This person's batting average. You have the shortstop's batting average. You have the third baseman's batting average. You have the catcher's batting average. You have a whole bunch of other information now that's available to you. And the question is there any way that you can use this other information to help you make a more informed guess about, for any one individual, what you would predict for their batting average in the future?
Right.
So let me propose to you two different ways now that you can, two different reasonable guesses that you can make. So first reasonable guess is, let's just treat our baseball player of interest, let's treat them independently of the rest of the team. Let's ignore the rest of the team. And my best guess as to what this batter is going to do in the future is just, let's say we're halfway through the season. So we have stats on the first half of the season, and I say the second half of the season, my best guess is they're going to have a batting average that's equal to the first half of the season. Mm-hmm. So we'll say that it's kind of like the individual mean, if you like, is my best guess. Or my estimator. In fact, estimator is like usually what you hear this called because you're reading a statistics paper.
Ah, I got it. Okay.
Yeah,
So best
so-
guess is estimator because you got to have a fancier sounding term.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe estimators are like a little bit more complicated, but like my
Okay.
estimator is the mean, the individual mean. Okay, so that's strategy number one. Strategy number two is instead, let's say that my estimator is the mean of all the means. So it's the average of the pitcher and the catcher and the third baseman and the shortstop and the left fielder and all that stuff.
Right. Right. Now this one actually, this one kind of confused me. Like, not knowing where you're going with this, my intuition says your player of interest's batting average is roughly independent, is generally independent of the batting average of all the rest of the team. I mean, there are probably some examples, like if you have especially really, really bad morale, that might impact it. But, like, I just don't personally see how other players' batting average would have any impact on the player of interest. And furthermore, it seems strange to make that connection if you also only have past data of your players. Like, for example, I could imagine if you had half of a season for your player of interest, but you had the entire season's worth of data, like also the future for all of your other players. I don't know, that feels a little bit more tractable, but I also think, based on the fact that you brought this up, that my intuition is completely wrong.
Yeah, so let me give you maybe an intuitive case in which might make it more apparent why the other players might be relevant. Mm-hmm. So let's suppose that your player of interest was just recently traded to this team, or like was injured or something. And for some reason, the first half of the season, this batter was only at bat 2 times. And as it happened, got extremely lucky and hit home runs on both of those 2 at-bats. Mm-hmm. So now our empirical guess, if what we're taking is just the mean from the first half of the season, our guess right now is that the player is going to bat 1,000 for the remainder of the season. Yeah. Whereas, let's say, if you were to look at the team as a whole, you find that by and large they're batting, 250 plus minus a bit. So in that case, I would argue that the context of the rest of the team is giving you some information, which is basically that the player that you're interested in seems to be a little bit of an outlier. And so you probably, in this case, would want to come up with some kind of compromise between what the group as a whole seems to be doing, and then, maybe there is some information in the fact that this player did really, really well in the first half, small sample, but in the first half of the season, maybe this guy actually is pretty good and he's going to be above average, but I don't think anyone would expect him to bat 1,000 for the rest of the season.
Yeah, given that nobody ever has, so.
Right.
So yeah, that example is actually, it does illustrate a little bit better. I guess the thing that my intuition wasn't taking into account is that you do have a smaller sample size for an individual, whereas if you take into account the entire team, now you have a lot more data points, and so you're going to be able to converge on maybe a truer answer. Whereas obviously batting 1,000, getting a hit every single time at bat is just clearly not reasonable.
Yeah, and so there's a more precise way that we can formulate this, actually. We've arrived at the place where we're going with this, which is talking about what's called the James-Stein estimator. So the first estimator that we floated was the idea of, let's just take the mean of this player's batting average for the first half of the season.
Right.
The second estimator that we were thinking about is, let's take the mean of the means of the entire baseball team and use that as our estimate of what
the
any
mean
individual.
Of all the means.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Uh-huh. And so the James-Stein estimator is a compromise in between the two. So the James-Stein estimator, there's a mathematical formulation. We say the James-Stein estimator, we're going to call it Z, and that is equal to the grand mean, so that's the mean of all the means, plus some correction factor, and that correction factor is a constant C that we'll come back to, times the difference between the grand mean and the individual mean. So if you have someone who's batting far above or far below the group average, then the difference between the group average and that individual mean is going to be large. And so that large difference is going to be multiplied by this constant. And then you're going to take a step in the direction of the group mean. And that step is going to be larger if there's like a bigger difference that you have to make up. So in other words, it's a compromise. It's a way of formulating exactly the compromise that we want to strike between the individual and the group.
Okay, so you're striking this compromise between the two. You did mention a constant you called C, and I'm guessing that's not the speed of light.
It is not the speed of light. No, that's right. So C is, there's a formula for C, and so the exact formula for C is 1 minus, now there's a fraction in the numerator, the fraction is K minus 3 times sigma squared over the sum of y minus y bar squared.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
No.
It's actually, this isn't too crazy, actually. So what this is saying is... so.
Although, I do have to just say, describing equations on a podcast, I don't know.
Pure gold. This is why people listen to us. Yeah, so what's going on with this C? Let me just kind of heuristically explain it. So the bigger value C has, it means the bigger of a step you're going to be taking away from any individual prediction. So the idea is we're trying to understand how we're going to adjust an individual prediction. And we have the choice between the group mean and the individual mean that we've measured before. And so the bigger C is, that's basically saying err more on the side of the individual mean.
That makes... Okay, so if I think of it as I'm starting at my baseball player of interest, and then I'm taking a step towards the entire average of all of the means on the team. If I think about it that way, then C defines how big of a step I take towards the team's average and away from the individual players. So the larger C is, the less we weight our player of interest's historical performance.
Yeah, that's right. And so something that can make C large is if we have a big standard deviation on the individual measurement that we're taking. So in the case of the baseball player who only had 2 at-bats, you're going to have a big uncertainty on that. And so you're going to say, like, okay, I'm going to allow myself to take a big step away from this potentially because it, has a big uncertainty on it. And so that's a reasonable thing to do. Another thing that allows you to take a big step away from the individual mean is K is one of the other numbers that goes into your calculation of C. And K is the number of unknown means so it's like sort of like the number of baseball players on your team in this case. So if you have a really, really big baseball team, if you have 1,000 people on your baseball team, then those 1,000 measurements are going to give you sort of a stronger indicator of where the group mean is than if you only had 5 players on your baseball team.
Got it. So if you have 1,000 players, then you can say it's a lot more likely that it's a lot less likely that your player of interest is going to be all that far away from the mean, or the clustering, I guess. Because you've got 1,000 people all really, really tightly packed. It would be pretty crazy if you had your 1,001th player, which is of interest to us. Turns out this person's not in the group. This person's like deviating significantly. Whereas if you have 5 baseball players and you're looking at a 6th, then that the clustering won't necessarily mean as much probabilistically.
Yeah, so there are 2 things that you said there actually, and only one of them is what I've covered so far, but let me just reiterate it to make the point. Yeah. So the first is we imagine there's sort of like this, I think cluster is a good heuristic word for it. Like it's not technically a cluster in the way that maybe you think about it, but it's a good mental model as we have this cluster and that's our baseball team, and then we have some individual point and we're trying to decide whether to take the cluster more seriously or the point more seriously or whatever. And so how important we think the cluster is basically a function of 2 things, which is how many members are in that cluster. How big is our baseball team? Does it have 1,000 people or does it have 5 people? And then the second thing, which I hadn't said, but you sort of said it, is how tightly clustered is that cluster? So are they all piled right on top of each other, or is it pretty diffuse? And so if it's a very diffuse cluster, then maybe we're going to take sort of a less strong indication from that.
Got it. And that's all wrapped up inside of the equation for C and also K.
Yeah. This is how you calculate the adjustment that you're going to make to any given point. So you can calculate what's called the James-Stein estimator. And the James-Stein estimator is the thing that's sort of the compromise between the individual and the group. And the thing that's kind of interesting about the James-Stein estimator is that when you take the James-Stein estimator, if you're applying it to just one individual baseball player, then it could get you closer to sort of the true batting average for that person, but it could also move them away potentially. So if you had a true outlier, for example, if you really had someone who was the greatest baseball player who's ever existed,
or if I was on the team, I would be the worst baseball player that's ever existed.
Right. It can artificially inflate your stats by virtue of your teammates. It's effectively saying there's no way this guy is this bad. The James-Stein estimator is not necessarily guaranteed to get you closer to kind of true answer for any individual, but on average, it will get you closer to, if you were to like add up your errors over the entire baseball team, on average, it will get you closer to kind of like the correct distribution than if you were to take each one of them individually, which is interesting. This whole thing that I've just explained is often called Stein's paradox. And on the one hand, I think that it's not that paradoxical in some ways, the idea that you want to, if you see, some member of a group who's far overperforming or underperforming the group as a whole, that might be an indication that you have some regression to the mean that you might expect, or something that you think that maybe the underperformers will do a little bit better in the future. The reason they were doing so poorly was because, they just got unlucky, and in the future they won't necessarily get unlucky. And then likewise for the overperformers. And the thing that's interesting about Stein's paradox is that it doesn't have anything in it that requires that all of the baseball players be baseball players, so to speak. So there's all these funny examples of, let's suppose that you have, your baseball team and you're trying to figure out how good they are at baseball or whatever. But instead of putting in, you put in 19 baseball players, and instead of putting in the 20th one, you put in, let's say, the fraction of, instead of putting in somebody's batting average, you put in the fraction of cars in Chicago that are made by foreign manufacturers, right? Like, just pick something that couldn't conceivably have anything to do with baseball averages. The thing that's crazy about Stein's paradox is that, or about, the whole James-Stein estimator thing that we just talked about, is that it will very happily, you can pass that number into these calculations and everything works just fine. And in fact, the actual conclusions still hold, that the James-Stein estimator that you make on the basis of this very weird data set that you've just assembled of 19 baseball averages and one ratio of car manufacturers, on average, will get you better estimates for the baseball players' averages than if you didn't do that, which is totally weird.
Yeah.
On the other hand, here's the way to think about it, though, is that, so I think that there's actually a pretty good illustrative point that's not quite as absurd, because this is clearly absurd.
This is clearly absurd.
Yeah. But here's a case that's slightly less absurd. So there's an example I was reading about where they were trying to figure out infection rates for toxoplasmosis in this country in South America. El Salvador, that's what it was.
And what's toxoplasmosis?
Oh, it's this disease, and the main thing I know about it is that like cats carry it, but I think it can be pretty dangerous. I think if you're pregnant and you have toxoplasmosis, it can be related to like schizophrenia later in life and all kinds of nasty stuff. So
sounds like a nasty thing.
Yeah, it's not something you really want to have. And, if there's feral cats hanging around, I think the transmission rates of toxoplasmosis from cats to humans can be non-negligible. And so the idea was they were taking measurements all over El Salvador of toxoplasmosis rates, and they were going to use them to try to figure out where to place hospitals. And so the idea is that the toxoplasmosis rates in any one city, there's sort of this true toxoplasmosis rate that you can't actually measure, in the same way you can't actually measure someone's true batting average. But you can take some measurements, and that'll give you a good starting point to guess. And then the idea was that they then did the James-Stein, what's called shrinkage, usually when you take these means and you kind of readjust them based on what you see over the entire group that you've assembled. And so the thing about the James-Stein, the shrinkage, the amount that you actually move your estimate, how far off your James-Stein estimator is from just the mean that you would have taken just out of the box. In this particular case, overall, this was actually a case that they looked at. Over the population as a whole, the James-Stein estimators were giving estimates that in about 70% of the cases were closer to sort of the true mean than if you had just used the means without any shrinkage. The thing about it, though, is that the James-Stein estimator can give a significantly worse estimate in the case of outliers. On average, it might be doing a little bit better, but then the outliers can actually do significantly worse. So let's suppose that there's some city that, let's say, gets different rainfall than all the other ones. It's a different type of geography, and so the animals that transmit toxoplasmosis are much more prevalent in that area. And so we have a true outlier because there's actually like a different underlying mechanical reason. In that case, the James-Stein estimator is still going to take that outlier and it's going to try to pull it in closer to the group average, but then it's going to like get it way off. So you're kind of trading, slight improvements on the bulk of your guesses for sometimes large degradation of any individual outcome. And so in the case of trying to use information about car rates to infer something about batting averages, well, obviously car rates and batting averages don't really have anything in common. And so there's a good chance that your car rates are just going to be pulled toward the group average. And as a result, you're going to end up with like a really big error on that, which makes sense because it's not related at all. So there's kind of this trade-off where if there really is some kind of underlying dynamic, then the James-Stein estimator is really good at like using the shrinkage to kind of pull everything closer to something that's described by that underlying dynamic. But if there isn't an underlying dynamic, then it can actually just kind of spit things off all over the place. And in general, still things will be like a little bit closer to the underlying true answer. But the more and more you move toward a data set that doesn't have anything in common with it underneath, the more and more the James-Stein estimator doesn't actually buy you anything. So it's not going to get any worse than if you just kept everything independent, taken over the entire population. But it's not something that you can just apply to random collections of numbers and expect to get estimates that are therefore more accurate than if you had done the naive thing that made sense off the bat, like treated them each individually.
Okay, so I think that made sense. You've got the shrinkage where the outlier data points are going to be disproportionately pulled in. But I guess I don't understand yet how the one data point on car manufacturers will make your however number of baseball players any better. Like how does that actually improve the data set?
Oh yeah. Well, so in this case, because car manufacturers have nothing to do with baseball,
right?
Then the way that I like to think about it is you can add in that data point and you're not adding in any additional helpful information. I think we would agree. You're just kind of adding in some noise. But the thing that makes this a little bit of a paradox, the thing that's I think is kind of cool about it, is that even though you're not adding in any information, you're also not making it worse.
Is that that's because it disproportionately demotes outliers and their effect on the data set?
Yeah, so it will just pull the outliers toward the group. It'll also pull the group a little bit toward the outlier. And the thing that's a little bit weird about it is that if there's really no connection between the outlier and the group, then usually, those steps they'll take toward each other, like that'll end up as basically a wash. So in the worst case, over the entire set of predictions you might want to make, you make a bunch of small errors in one direction and you make a big error from another data point, and like kind of everything is on average not any worse than it was before. Which is weird. Yeah, it's not something that you want to do.
Right.
You don't want to add in spurious information that's not corrected because it's not going to get you anywhere. But the thing that's a little bit paradoxical about the James-Stein estimator is that there's basically mathematical limits on how much worse it can make things to add in kind of this spurious, unconnected information.
That's really cool. So I can rest easy knowing that I just joined that baseball team.
Oh, and the James-Stein estimator is just going to pull you right on up to the group mean?
No. What I meant is I won't affect their numbers if you're using a James-Stein estimator. All that much, at least. Because I would definitely be an outlier.
Right. So it would get you way off. It would get the rest of them a little bit off, but it's not going to get them really any worse off than if you hadn't been in the data set to begin with.
That makes me happy. I actually want to close out this episode just by sharing a brief story about how literally I'm horrible at baseball.
Oh, do tell.
Yeah, so I played, most recently when I played baseball, I was playing in the T-ball league, and I after this incident I quit partially because this incident was traumatic, and partially because then kids my age started throwing the balls rather than me hitting it off of a tee. And I just felt that was unsafe.
Oh, so just for background, this was when you were a child. This was not when you were an adult. Okay.
No, this is last year.
I don't know. People play like softball. Anyway, go on.
Well, but t-ball. I don't know. Maybe. If you're over 10 years old and you play t-ball, right in.
Oh.
So I was in right field, and I think I was like playing with the grass or something like that. And I hear the crack of a bat, and I look up. And this is the one time a fly ball is hit to me. So this is my moment. But rather than like seizing this moment and catching the ball and being the hero of the game, I froze in place, petrified. I put up my glove, not to catch the ball, but to protect my face from the ball. And the ball landed in my glove and then slowly rolled out and fell on the ground. And that was the end of my baseball career. So rather than having a sports thing that I do every night, I instead log on to Skype and talk to you. And I think it works out for the best for me.
Linear Digressions is a Creative Commons endeavor, which means you can share or use it any way you like. Just tell them we said hi. To find out more about this or any other episode of Linear Digressions, go to lineardigressions.com. And if you like this podcast, go ahead and leave us a review on iTunes so other people get to listen to this content too. You can always get in touch with either of us. Our emails are ben@lineardigressions.com and katie@lineardigressions.com in case you have comments or suggestions for future shows. You can tweet us at lindigressions. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.